jumping way back, what I realized, and Christopher and I have had conversations about whether you should be making arguments for atheism or whether you should be advancing any positions and persuading people out of positions that they hold. And I've used several analogies about my wife going out driving with dangerous conditions and her not being convinced of it, or that there are scenarios where I feel I have an obligation to persuade someone otherwise because I am taking the situation differently than them. But when I got away from the hangout that night, I was thinking about it, and I've said many times that I would go back and punch myself in the face for having converted or attempted to convert, or in some cases did convert individuals to Christianity who were gay, who left
I like how specific you are about where you would punch yourself. I would punch myself. It's not that you would just punch yourself. I would punch myself in the face.
I might go for the nuts for the second shot.
Right in the fucking throat.
Well, throat or in the ear, like Fight Club in the ear. But the point being that I held beliefs that now I consider to be harmful or detrimental or pernicious towards the well-being of others, and that we are not in a position to ever, like, I think I'm in a better position now, and I have certain moral oughts that I feel I'm driven by, and that part of those are persuading others out of positions that I see being harmful. But it fights me against this notion that there was a time where I was also of that opinion and arguing completely the opposite of where I am. And so either Ozzy or anyone else, in terms of how do you view your obligation out of moral obligation to persuade people otherwise when you see it having consequences, when in fact you don't know that you are in a position to that you won't regret down the road. So
I think this is one point where Ozzy and I might disagree, because in the side chat, Ozzy gave a hell yes. Right?
Yeah, Maute, why don't you give the hell no, and then I'll give the hell yes.
Oh, okay. So for me, the reason why I would go hell no is because the way that they... unless there is evidence that the person that I'm talking to has influence outside of their private boundaries, then what occurs within their private boundaries is private, which means I'm on a need-to-know basis. And I am not to influence that privacy. If they go out in public, if it is known that they're going to go out in public and do something to follow through that manifests on these ideas that I disagree with, then I think that the risk perception, remember we were talking about that, Bert, the risk perception kind of shifts a little bit. Like, and of course, yeah, I guess I'm going to leave it at that. So depending on what they're doing in their private life, and they have their structure, and I disagree with it, is what it is. Right? So long as, like, it's not obvious that they're, like, harming children and simple shit like that. But if they're going to take these ideas on board and move into the public sphere and try to, you know, whatever, do things that are going to influence other people that disagree with them, and they're just going to persist in their attempts to persuade and move forward their agenda, then I feel a little bit more compelled to be like, yeah, well, that's a little fucked up. So that's why my plan A is not necessarily to, you know, try to persuade them otherwise. That's my plan A.
Yeah, okay, I see it differently. Your view is sometimes summarized, and you can disagree with it, and then I'll change it accordingly if you do. But it's sometimes summarized as, you know, I don't care what another person believes, or if they believe in God for something. If it doesn't, break my arm or pick my pocket, I don't care, right? Jefferson had a line like that. And that's the view that unless another person's beliefs affect me, I don't have to be concerned about them. Or unless their beliefs affect another person, like in their voting behavior or something like that, I don't need to be concerned. And I think that the circle of my concern extends to the person that I'm talking to. If I see that a person is operating under a set of beliefs that I think are going to be harmful to them, I think I have a moral obligation to try to talk them out of it. Not in every instance, right? I mean, sometimes it's an opportunity, and sometimes I think.
Oh. We lost him. Oh boy.
Right in the middle of a good point, too.
Yeah.
I want to hear the rest of that point back. So I think that it's more appropriate to let him talk than to let me talk.
Thanks. And I apologize for my abrupt departure there. I was upstairs in a room. My laptop wasn't plugged in, and my battery just kicked out all at once. I tried to say, the screen's gone blank. I hope you can still hear me. Anyway, I'm back in my usual spot, and I'm plugged in. So what I was saying is, my view is that I think that I have moral obligations that extend even to a person who disagrees with me, where their beliefs will not impact on me or anybody else, but they will have an impact on them. I mean, if I thought someone was going to harm themselves, come to some immediate harm because they were operating under some delusion or misapprehension, and by delusion I just mean a mistaken belief. I don't mean that they're delusional, right? Just that they're deluded about something. They're mistaken about something, perhaps radically. Then I think I would have an obligation to try to talk them out of it. It wouldn't give me an obligation to coerce them in any way, but to rationally persuade them, right? Now, of course, the person can say, well, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, well, you don't want to talk about it. Okay. Unless I have some, stake in it myself, then I'm not going to talk about it. I'll just say, okay, fine. Are you sure about this? Because I think you're making a terrible mistake, and I think you do well to listen to a different opinion, right? But I don't think there's anything objectionable about talking to people about what they say they believe. I think that one of the highest compliments you can pay to a person is to give them the respect of taking their beliefs seriously, even where they don't affect you, and say, listen, these beliefs are consequential to you. You are organizing your life around these beliefs. They may never impact on me. They may never impact on anyone else, but they're consequential to you. And if you care about your beliefs being true, and I happen to be in possession of some arguments that I think should undermine your confidence and perhaps even cause you to revise your beliefs, then I think I have an obligation, given that I think that you're mistaken and that you will suffer for operating with a defective map of reality. I have an obligation to tell you about this. This is not the same as imposing my beliefs. And there are a lot of people who sort of say, who are you to tell me? Well, who do I have to be to tell you?
You have to be somebody who matters to that person.
No.
And if you don't accept that, then that is audacious and presumptive.
No. Well, let me say why. Okay. If I want to persuade the person, I have to be able to approach them in such a way that they will respect what I say. If a person doesn't care what I say, it doesn't matter how much they love me or respect me. Okay. If a person is sufficiently dogmatic, it doesn't matter how much they love and care about you; they'll still ignore you. Okay. And if a person thinks that you're a complete imbecile, it doesn't matter how good your reasons are, right? If they don't respect you as a person, they might just not heed anything that you have to say, no matter how disastrously wrong-headed they are and how right you are.
That's almost a false dichotomy.
No, it's not. I'm not making a dichotomy. Wait, let me get the point out. I'm not making a dichotomy. The point is, there's nothing morally wrong. Pragmatically, it's foolish to try to talk people out of a position when you know that they don't hold you in enough regard or they don't esteem your position enough to take it seriously. Pragmatically, okay, that's not very effective. But it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with trying. And I do think that we have an obligation to try to reach people who disagree with us. And it's also very, very hard to predict what will reach people. This is a discussion I've had with Yves Riehl a number of times. I mean, people know that my approach in discussions is fairly amicable and conciliatory. I try to be respectful. But I also recognize that there are different approaches. Like, laughter, ridicule, and scorn and derision actually have their place because that's what works on some people, right? That's what actually fires up some people, and then they want to shoot back, and then they have to do some thinking, right? So I mean, my approach, I think, is more effective for getting a person to reconsider his or her position and to take my position more seriously. But it's not the only way, and you don't always know. And so I think that because other people should matter to us, if by our lights they are going to do something by acting on their beliefs that's going to be harmful to them, that's going to impoverish their lives, then we have a moral obligation and a duty to try to talk them out of it and to use the methods that will work. I mean, you can't just be stupid about this. And that's no different than when a religious person looks at me and says, "Oh, listen, Ozzy, your atheism is going to put you straight to hell. You might not do anything about it. You might not talk about atheism. You might not teach your kids to believe that you believe and stuff like that. Maybe no one will be affected by your beliefs, but your soul is in peril, right?" That person is doing me a kindness when they preach the gospel to me. Okay, I don't take umbrage that they do that, and I often bristle when I hear atheists say, "Oh, I can't stand it when people preach to me." Hey, listen, if they're just doing it because they're trying to follow the rule that says preach the gospel, then okay, then they're just rule followers, and I don't care. But when people are actually moved by, hey, I like that person, I really would like them to be saved too, right? That I think is not something to take umbrage at, and that shows the person respect. That's the person showing you some respect, and I show the same respect when I see a person that I disagree with, and I say, hey, well, listen, I hear what you're saying, but I disagree, and here's why. That doesn't mean that you have to ruin every Thanksgiving dinner and unleash on the first person you see wearing a cross around their neck.
No, and Ozzy, and that's a point that we agree on. Being able to challenge, and the way with which we challenge, is the entrance of that challenge. I guess the point of contention that I have is, when do you give that challenge up? At what point do you realize that the person is not dogmatic and they do show you respect, but at the same time you're pushing the point beyond what is socially appropriate?
Oh, well, that's different, though. I mean, I have an obligation to try to persuade a person, and if I see that the person is unpersuadable for whatever reason, either they don't respect me, they don't like my arguments, or they've heard my arguments, they think their arguments are superior, right? And I see that my arguments are just sort of bouncing off of them ineffectively, then I don't think I have an obligation to doggedly persist and hound them. I don't think that it's appropriate to hector people. The only reason you would do that is if you thought the stakes were so high, like they were going to kill themselves, or ruin themselves financially, and make it a disaster of their lives, right? I mean, I think that going around believing in Christianity and feeling all the misplaced guilt that a lot of Christians and Jews and Muslims feel and stuff like that, that I think is unfortunate. That alone is worth trying to disabuse people of these false beliefs. But that's not the worst thing that you can experience. You can suffer worse things. And you also have to be careful that when you do disabuse people of their beliefs, if you succeed, you could be putting them in a worse place psychologically. I mean, I think it's actually true that religion serves as a crutch in many cases, and some people need that crutch. There are some people that I think have been so beholden to something like divine command theory and a simplistic, quick and dirty ethical position that if you just sort of yank that out from under them, they undergo a kind of moral disequilibrium, and they don't know what to do. And some people will actually do stupid things, not necessarily start raping and killing. Nobody actually does that. Just because they become an atheist, that's sort of a fantasy that people have. But that doesn't happen. But people can, in fact, lose their moral equilibrium and screw things up for themselves. So I think we have to be responsible in how we do this. But the fact that there are risks that you could hurt a person, that you could annoy a person, you could even potentially lose a friendship over it, doesn't mean that you don't have an obligation. And it's all in the execution. You have to be conscientious. You have to be sensitive to what the person will listen to. I mean, I've had a number of ongoing conversations.
I agree that it's a case-by-case basis, but I also think that it is, I don't know. I guess we're talking past each other, because on a case-by-case basis, yes, we are in agreement. And I guess the topic of conversation for me was in general. And in general, I think it is audacious, the position that you hold. I think that is presumptive or presumptuous. I don't know what the appropriate word is. The position that you hold.
What am I presuming?
Well,
You're presuming that what you think is correct should be conveyed to the person that you're talking to,
of course,
in such a way that they don't know. No,
because I think it's because, look, Everything I hold.
But it goes.
It
comes down to the question that you ask: who do I have to be? You have to be somebody who matters to the person that you're talking to.
No,
because
of
if you
course
don't,
not. You've never been talked into a different position by someone you didn't care about. Chances are, Maute, practically every important theoretical change in your position and outlook you've ever had has been effectuated by someone you didn't even know, who's just a stranger on the internet or words on a page, right? You don't have to care about it. I mean, we are.
No. I think that's bullshit. I think that it's.
You've never picked up a book.
I think that it's.
I think that it's whose views
driven. My opinion has been changed. My opinion has been changed by people that I don't know. That had no knowledge of who I was, that I pursued their information on purpose because I happen to have a position where I want my ideas challenged, right?
You've never had your views.
That's totally, but that's not what we're talking about.
You've never had your views challenged by someone against your will and changed.
Hold on a second. We're talking about I thought we were talking about one-to-one interactions.
Okay.
Where there are intentions to persuade based on what one agent thinks is more valid, right, than the person that they're talking to. I think that is the presumptive part. You're presuming that you know better than the person you're talking to.
You always do. You always do when you disagree with someone.
I understand. That's the difference.
No, wait. No, hang on. Every minute that you think that you are in possession of something that's true and the other person is incorrect, that is to say, every time you disagree with someone, you are in the position of thinking that you're correct and they're incorrect. That's not presumption. That's what it is to hold a belief. It's to think that I think X is true and another person thinks X is not true.
But that's very different than persuasion. Of course I think that. Of course, when I say something...
That's the presumption you're accusing me of.
I'm not done talking. Of course, when I say something and somebody disagrees with it, I think that I'm right and they are wrong.
Right.
Then there is a choice.
How presumptuous of you.
Then there is a choice to be made to persuade that person that my position is correct and they should uphold my position.
No. Wait a minute. Stop. To try to persuade someone is to try to presumably rationally persuade them, not coerce them and not to sort of emotionally crowbar them into holding your belief, right? I mean, that would be presumptuous if you were trying to do that, right? But when you're just trying to persuade a person, what you're trying to say is, look, here are my reasons. I'm appealing to your sense of rationality, okay? Your respect.
See, according to that very liberal definition of persuasion, we agree. I was using a more colloquial definition where it's like, I intend to change your mind.
Well,
right?
I do.
When I give my reasons, my justifiable reasons for my beliefs, I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm just trying to make you understand why I think what I think. If you should take that on board...
Why do you bother? Why do you bother if not?
Because he's trusting the other person to deliberate.
Right, in the expectation that is what will persuade them. Right. This is about rational persuasion.
No. You're framing it all in persuasive terms. And that's not the case.
Well, I thought that's
sometimes discussion is discussion.
Christopher, can you?
I actually view it like Christopher does, and I know that sounds weird, but that's how I view it. I view it a lot more like that.
I don't mean to end this conversation, but I need to go pee real quick. I'll be back in just a minute.
Wait, let me try to talk you out of it.
No, my bladder's full, Ozzy.
Go, man.
This is like that hangout that we had on Deeper Than Dogma, or is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah, Deeper Than. I watch another podcast with a similar name, Deeper Than Dogma, right? The one with Floyd and everybody, and the one that Maute set up that ended up kind of a disaster with DPR and Skeptic Fence. Skeptic Fence was like, yeah, I'm on Team Understanding, and he said, I want to make people understand, and you can't make people do anything, right? And I view understanding as like, let's put this on the table. You can pick up what I'm laying down or not, but at least you know. And you can lay down your cards on the table, and I can pick up what you're laying down or not, but let me deliberate. You can judge for yourself, and I can judge for myself, and that's that. Where persuasion is more of an argument in my mind. Matt Bell was Team Persuasion, and he was very firm on that pretty much everything's persuasion. And it shows when he talks to people. So I see it a little more like Maute. You see it all intertwined or the same, Ozzy?
See what all intertwined. I mean, I'm talking
persuasion and understanding.
I was expressing that I think we have a moral obligation to try to change people's minds when we think that they're mistaken. That doesn't mean that you have to hector people, that you have to be rude, and that you use illicit means of trying to change their mind, but that you should use the means of respectful, rational persuasion. That is, you abide by the norms of rational and civil discourse. That's how you should do it. And that, I think, is showing a person respect. There's almost no greater form of condescension than saying, okay, well, I think you're completely wrong, but it doesn't affect me, so I don't care. I mean, that's simply saying, I don't care that you're walking around with a defective map. I don't care what happens to you. It's not going to hurt me, so screw you. That is pure selfishness. I mean, I think that the circle of my compassion extends a little further than that. And there's a certain amount of altruism that's required to say, hey, listen, I know this generates some social awkwardness here, but I think you're really mistaken on this political position or this religious position or this particular attitude that you hold about this or whatever, right? And it's not presumptuous to say, my view is right. Everybody thinks that their view is right. That's what it is to have a view, to have a position, to have a belief, right? It's to think that a certain thing is the case. Then it's not presumptuous to think that if I'm right and another person disagrees with me, that they're wrong. What would be presumptuous would be to say, well, I couldn't be mistaken, right? Well, of course, that would be presumptuous. But no one's saying, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting being dogmatic and trying to use illicit means. It's simply a matter of recognizing that we have a disagreement, and to the extent that I think your beliefs are consequential, even only to yourself, then I think I have a responsibility to try to persuade you in a way that is civil, respectful, and rational, not by other means. Those other means are no good. Those other means that's just fighting dirty, and you shouldn't do that. And if a person says, okay, well, I've heard your reasons, I'm still not persuaded. Okay, well, listen, if I've used the tools of rationality and they didn't work on you, then there's two possibilities. My arguments are not as good as I think they are, or you're not respecting the reasons well enough, and it might take more time. It might take another conversation. That's it. All right? And then you just have the conversation another day if it comes up. Right? As for who do you have to be, that's a rhetorical question to point out that you don't have to be anybody in particular.
And how do you know your map's not faulty?
Nobody knows that their map is.
So we're all persuading, not knowing if our map is faulty. So we're so convinced to persuade.
Wait, hang on. This is what's mistaken here, okay? If I had to be certain, I wouldn't be allowed to change a person's mind about anything, even if it was consequential to me and everybody else in the world, right? You don't have to be in possession of certainty to have a disagreement with someone. I don't have to know that I couldn't be mistaken about my map. Right? You have a map, I have a map. I go, hey, I think your map's wrong. Why? Well, here's the reasons why I think your map is wrong and why my map is right. And that's the conversation that you have to have. If the conversation could only proceed under conditions where I say, it is impossible for me to have a mistaken map, then what your position is this. You're only entitled to have a disagreement with a person and try to persuade them under the conditions of a dogmatist. Only when you're a dogmatist about your position should you be able to do this. Well, no, I'm not a dogmatist, and those are not the only conditions where I can have this conversation. I mean, have you ever known a person who held beliefs that were not going to affect you or anyone around them, but were going to be disastrous to themselves, right? Where they might make themselves penniless, where they were wasting money on some weird cult or a pyramid scheme or something like that? I mean, you're just not going to do anything because it doesn't pick your pocket, it doesn't break your arm, it doesn't affect their voting behavior. Right? You're just going to let them go. You're going to let someone sink everything that they have into a pyramid scheme and lose their house and impoverish themselves? Of course you wouldn't. Right? The difficulty here is this. We are talking about subjects.
Everything's not that dire. That's the risk perception component. Exactly
what I was trying to get at. This is the exact point I'm going to make. What happens, though, is that people who are not believers, okay, have a tendency to think, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because there is no heaven and hell, so it doesn't matter. No great evil is going to befall them. But I disagree with that. People waste their lives worrying about things that they shouldn't worry about, feeling guilt over things they shouldn't feel guilt about, scrupulously observing rituals and observances that are a complete waste of time and that are robbing them of other things, diverting their attention from from worthwhile, genuinely gratifying pursuits in order to scrutinize the Bible one more time and read one more commentary about it, right? Now, if those beliefs are incorrect, those people are in fact wasting all of that time. Now, it's their time to waste, but I wouldn't want to be wasting my time, and they don't want to be wasting their time either. If you can convince them that they're wasting their time, they will thank you. Hey, listen, I'm glad you disabused me of this, right? They won't thank you now as long as they hold that position. If you want to sort of experience someone saying, hey, thanks for disabusing me of this position, you actually have to go to the trouble of disabusing them of their position. But in the case of the Great Debate, very often, it's very hard to point to the facts. You can't demonstrate that there's no God. You can't demonstrate that there's no heaven and hell. It's harder to do. The conversation has to go on longer. And so people have a tendency to shrug their shoulders and say, well, I can't do this in a conversation. It doesn't pick my pocket or break my arm. It's not going to wreck their lives, in the immediate future. So I'll just let them labor under their misapprehensions. But that, I think, is actually showing people a certain amount of disrespect and a lack of concern and compassion for their well-being. And so I think we do have an obligation. But that doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about it. I mean, don't be a dick always applies.
Can I offer this a little bit back, but along the same lines, is that presumably as well there are reasons which undergird the position that you hold that you're trying to be persuasive of, and those reasons matter, right? Like those will be the ingredients as to why, to some degree, why they should hold this other position. And so I think it's not that you're coming in and stipulating or laying down something that doesn't have any ties, right? Like the whole point of it is that you think it because it actually ties to something that you think you can demonstrate or you think you can persuade someone of. And if you don't actually have the grounding there and they don't listen to you, maybe you need to revise, or maybe you need to be the one that maybe that isn't, obviously when I was having those Bible studies with gay students who I was doing so with not a whole lot of time invested in those beliefs and not a lot of investigation done, and probably had anybody met me and pressed me on it, I probably would have crumbled. I probably wouldn't have fallen apart. But I don't know. I guess I see it that it's not just simply the conclusions. There are reasons behind your underlying what you're trying to persuade someone of, and that you would think that those actually matter, that those reasons actually have some impact. There's some reason behind it. So. Did you want to go, Chris? So I was also going to say that I've certainly found myself taking a more there's a lot of big issues in America, obviously, right now, and there are worldwide, but we have particular issues we're dealing with here. And along the same lines as the New York Times putting out an editorial on guns on the front page, I feel like to some degree my airing of the views and my entertaining discussion and having civil dialogue with others, exposing them to ideas that I have, I'm hoping that it influences change in them so that we can have conversations about some of these issues where I think we have to have change. It's a little like what I was saying to you, Christopher, in that like I can't necessarily affect them on some something I care about without actually affecting the underlying propositions which influence their worldview. So if they hold certain dispositions that I'm not able to, if I can't speak to those, I can't persuade them out of something that I feel is of moral consequence to society, right?
I don't know where to go with that, because that takes it to a different level. Like, all right, there are people I disagree with. Let's keep this as general as possible, because when we get into specifics, we fuck everything up, because we all agree it's a case-by-case basis, right? So in general, what's your plan A? Is your plan A to persuade? Is your plan A to understand? If you're trying to understand, then
you have to understand to persuade.
I agree with that, okay? In order to persuade the best, you need to understand where they're coming from so that you know which way of persuasion is going to work best. Is that kind of where you're going, Ozzy?
You can't get as far as persuading a person unless you understand their position, because you will immediately be strawmanning their position if you're mistaken, unless you happen to just be lucky and get it right despite understanding their reasons. I mean, part of persuading is understanding not just what they believe but why they believe it. Mm-hmm. And once you understand that, then you can figure out, okay, well, given how they see it, now I understand. Now I can formulate a strategy for undermining their belief, and that's what this is about, right? I mean, this is how you persuade. You undermine a person's reasons and confidence, right? And sometimes you undermine their motives by showing that their motives are that they're ill motivated, that they're poorly motivated beliefs. And that's how you proceed. But for that, you have to have some understanding of the person's psychology, and you have to have a certain amount of social intelligence. It's not just a matter of, well, what is your syllogism? There's more to it than that. Yeah. And of course that demands a certain amount of respect and patience. You have to be willing to listen to the person and hear them.
But at the same time, the fact that you would tack on persuasion at the end of the understanding component, there are some of us that just want to understand. That's it. That is the goal.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Understanding towards persuasion.
I don't have any objection to people who want to understand. I just think that I thought we were talking about whether or not we have any kind of obligation or duty to either persuade, or obligation or duty to avoid persuading, or it's just some kind of neutral position that one can take. Well, my view is that no.
That's a good point to bring up, because that's it's the duty obligation point, because I brought up a distinction that I think exists between persuasion versus understanding, and you kind of broke it down by saying, well, you can do both. You can understand, and then based on your understanding, persuade better. Right? Is that a fair assessment of how that went?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I think it's the same. Sorry, I don't want to interject here, but I think it's the same. In more practical terms. When we have this kind of discussions, they happen every so often on G+ about gun control in the U.S. I mean, I can try to persuade you till I get blue in the face from my point of view why one view is better than the other. But unless I don't try to understand you, that you have a legislative system, where apparently some rights are there while we haven't, we will never have a proper conversation. I will stand from my viewpoint, even if the goal is the same. Sometimes even the tools that you use require us to understand the other person's viewpoint. And that's the same, with gun control or death penalty. The example I made before. The reason we don't have
death penalty by gun.
Death penalty by gun. Yeah, there you go. The main reason we don't have death penalty around here is, mostly because of philosophical reasons. Okay, that guy Cesare Beccaria made a wonderful job, in past times. He convinced, made a really good argument. People, went with that argument. They made part of the culture and the society, and it is ingrained on how they think. Now, if I want to apply my reasoning to that topic with someone from China or from Saudi Arabia or from Texas, I will be that would be a big problem, because even if the topic is the same, the level we start from are completely different. So I might as well try to persuade them in Italian, and they don't understand a single word of that, and my argument will be pristine, perfect. But if you don't try to understand the guy, there is some issues there.
He was too busy talking about his weird boner.
It's so weird right now. It's weird.
Yeah, I love the fact that people is watching that, see me trying to get a point in a language which is not mine, and these three assholes are talking about boners in the side chat. So you guys have got to know that, okay?
It makes sense to me.
No. For the record, it's Maute who's talking about boners in the side chat. It's not me.
Yeah, you see, I mean, yeah.
And for the record, it is Ozzy that is instigating my weird boner.
Have you got
Ozzy chops wood. That's what happens.